This short presentation will cover the formation of the Sui Tang Dynasties in China, almost 400 years after the fall of the Han Dynasty in 220 CE. You should take notes. You will take a quiz later this week based on the content of this presentation. Embedded in this presentation are two short video clips. One is a 3-minute clip about the formation or the construction of the Grand Canal under the Sui. The second is a 60-second clip about poetry as a part of the test or the Confucian test for the civil service. You can pause the presentation at any time if it is going too fast for you, so that you can get the notes you need. So, after the fall of the Han Dynasty in 220, China was characterized by 350 years of war and rival warlords fighting for power. This period in Chinese history is called the period of disunion. It ends in 586 when Emperor Wendy comes to power and forms the Sui Dynasty. Wendy will do three things to improve China. He will restore order after so many centuries of disunion, strengthen the government, reform the bureaucracy, and liberalize land policies in favor of the peasants. The greatest accomplishment of the Sui Dynasty is the construction of the Grand Canal. Most rivers in China run east and west, making it almost impossible to move large volumes of goods north and south. The Sui tried to solve this problem with the construction of an artificial waterway that connected north and southern China. It ran more than 1,000 miles and took 6 years to build. Here is a 3-minute clip from the History Channel about the construction of the Grand Canal. Whoops, let's start it over.
In the 6th century, a northern people, the Sui, declared war on the chaos, conquering one part of the empire after another, until China was united again, for the first time since the Han Dynasty fell 3 centuries earlier. The Emperor Yangdi would build the Sui Empire on the foundation of nearly 1,000 years of dynasties that came before. Unlike previous emperors who had concentrated on fortifying China against the outside world, Yangdi would channel his energies inward and strengthen his empire within its borders. China is vast, and its waterways provided the most efficient means of transportation over such great distances. 2 major rivers traverse the country east to west, the Yangtze in the south and the Yellow River in the north, but they are 1,000 miles apart. China was a house divided. Yangdi decided to do something about that. He aimed to link northern and southern China by a gigantic central artery, a Grand Canal, a kind of hydraulic highway for merchants, soldiers, and citizens.
Very common to China in terms of constructing any large infrastructure project. They would look at existing waterways and try to find an area where they could connect and link the entire canal. They want to take advantage of the natural geography.
This gigantic construction project would take more than 1 million man-days of work, most of it digging. Living and working conditions were horrendous, harsh and primitive. Tens of thousands died of starvation, fatigue, and illness. Many were simply beaten to death by overseers. More than 24 locks were needed to create a massive network of channels.
But every time you encounter a natural body of water, you need a lock to make a barrier between the canal and the lake or the river. When you go up any significant grade, you have to have locks to raise the water and the boats with it to get over any rise in the terrain?
It took 5 million workers over 6 years to build the Grand Canal.
When it was built, it stretched 1,200 miles, and it was the longest and most ambitious canal project that had ever been enacted on the Earth up to that time.
By connecting the Yellow River with the Yangtze, the Grand Canal could now transport goods up to 45 miles a day. Major cities along the canal grew into silk, porcelain, and cotton centers. Merchants and artisans supplied manufactured goods to opening markets throughout the entire country.
So that is the construction of the Grand Canal. So under the Sui, two big stories. The restoration of order after 350 years of disunion, of warlords fighting for power, and then the construction of the Grand Canal connecting northern and southern China. The Sui will fall for a number of reasons that include high taxes and the forced labor that we just saw, military reverses in Korea, and rebellions that break out in northern China in 610. That will bring to power the Tang Dynasty. It is under the Tang and then the subsequent dynasty of the Song that China begins its real golden age. It runs from 618 to 909. Three general characteristics. Chinese influence spread throughout East Asia during this period into Vietnam, Korea, and Japan. Prosperity, wealth, cultural achievement. It is probably the only period in history, or the greatest period in Chinese history, of literature and art. The government will serve as a model for governments in Korea and Japan. The Tang Dynasty is known mainly for its second emperor, Emperor Taizong, and it is under Emperor Taizong that Chinese territory will expand and the country will begin to prosper. The Tang Dynasty is built on the foundations of the Sui, and one of its great contribution is the building of a number of cities. Chang'an is the capital of China, with over 1 million people in 30 square miles. Blocks in the city are a little bit like New York, with bookshops, with tea shops, restaurants, all define Chang'an as a modern cosmopolitan city. Here we see other cities that formed during this period. Hangzhou, which is a port, but Chang'an is the greatest of those cities. China is also known during this period because of a female empress. She is the only female empress to rule China and to rule alone. She is known for her military campaigns to take over Korea. She is known for making Buddhism a state religion, as we saw with Ashoka and we saw with Constantine in the Byzantine Empire. When a king or emperor converts to a religion, then others convert as well. And Buddhism will begin to flower in China, and she will finance the building of many temples. But she is also known for her cruelty in appointing sadistic ministers to find her enemies and kill them. Let's look at three characteristics of the Tang. Communication is the first. It is under the Tang that the Silk Road will expand. It's a network based on roads, horses, and even human runners. There are inns, postal stations, and stables. The inns are called caravanserai. Caravanserai, S-E-R-A-I. The inns are almost like Motel 6s, where you can park your horse, get something to eat, and spend the night. Some of the goods that went along the Silk Road to China include horses, rugs, and tapestries. And of course, China sold silk, porcelain, and paper, mainly to Islamic civilizations. Paper, for example, will be introduced to the West by the Arabs, but it comes from China originally. Here is a map of the Silk Road starting in Chang'an during the Tang Dynasty and moving through deserts west and into India. Here is another map that shows you specific goods: silk, porcelain, tea, salt are some of the goods that move along the Silk Road. Agriculture, along with communication, is a big story under the Tang. The three-field system, the equitable distribution of the land in an attempt to avoid the large concentration of landed property among a few people. This was a way to make sure that many peasants owned fertile land. Military expansion was a big deal during the Tang Dynasty. The emperors brought Manchuria under control. They forced not the Sil dynasty, but the Silla kingdom in Korea to acknowledge the superiority of the Tang emperor, and they conquered northern Vietnam. Vietnam will be under Chinese control for many centuries to come. So, communication, military expansion, and then the bureaucracy of merit. The civil service will expand in a big way. They will recruit government officials from the ranks of Confucian scholars who had to study deeply Confucian literature and philosophies. It's a system that worked, a system of merit or a meritocracy because it got talented people working in the system. It lasted for over 13 centuries. Here is a short 60-second clip by a China specialist talking about the importance of poetry as part of the test.
In the year 680, composition of poetry was introduced as one of the requirements in the civil service examination that was used to recruit candidates outside of the governing elite for civil service. Many scholars today believe that the dramatic increase in the production of poetry that occurred at this time was related to the exam requirement.
To choose a member of the elite to participate in the government, and we should in the Tang, and here we should remember that the Tang was an aristocratic society, and that if your parents were nobility or high officials or powerful military people, you didn't have to take the examination. But for those who hoped for some social mobility, there was the examination system. And among the requirements of the examination system was the composition of poetry. Very bad poetry, highly stylized poetry, but what it meant was that at least the technical competence in writing poetry was necessary for anyone who hoped to rise in the government in the Tang Dynasty.
So, civil service, communication, and agriculture. Innovation is the last big story of the Tang. New technologies, printing, movable type using characters carved on wood blocks that you can see right here, raised up, ink is applied, and then it's printed. Porcelain, which is fine china, plates and cups, gunpowder, and mechanical clocks. More cosmopolitan culture. We saw that with Chang'an, with over 1 million people. We saw the reestablishment of safety on the Silk Road. It's said that during this time, a woman could walk along parts of the Silk Road with a big pot of gold on her head, and no one would attack her. She would be completely safe. And finally, tea comes to China from Southeast Asia during this period. In another presentation later, we'll look at the Song Dynasty, which continues the golden age that the Tang start.